The first warning didn't come in the form of sirens or blaring alarms. It was quieter, more subtle. A sudden silence across the forest colonies. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just the kind of stillness that sets something ancient inside you, on edge. People felt it before they saw it. The air grew dense. Animals in the nearby shelters began to panic for no reason. And then, the sky cracked open. We weren't at war. At least not yet. At that time, humanity was still in the expansion phase, building out new settlements beyond Earth's orbit, shaping the soil of distant planets into homes, schools, cities. Life was finally beginning to feel full of hope again. After generations of conflict and environmental collapse back on Earth, these colonies were supposed to be a fresh start, clean slates. But we should have known better. Peace never comes without a price. And there are always others watching from the dark. No one expected the Kravex to move this fast. They were a distant, aggressive species humanity had heard of in scattered whispers. Traders and drifters brought back rumors of a war-fueled empire in the deep sectors. But we hadn't seen them. Not up close. Not like this. When they arrived, they didn't broadcast demands. They didn't negotiate. They dropped their war beasts. It started in Sector 7, our oldest outer colony. Transmission feeds went black in the span of 5 minutes. A research satellite caught the last image. A massive shape crashing through the dense jungle canopy, moving with a speed and strength nothing natural should have. No tech. No machines. Just raw muscle and primal instinct wrapped in armor-like. Skin bigger than any earthborn creature, a beast. Engineered, controlled, and then silence. Panic spread fast, but faster still came the footage. A short, shaky clip from a miner's handheld drone showed one of the creatures dragging a 15-ton rover like it was made of paper. It moved like it had purpose, not wild, not random. This wasn't just destruction for the sake of it. These creatures were hunting, clearing, making space. For something. What made them worse was that they weren't alone. Each war beast came with a Kravex handler, armored head to toe, connected by strange neural threads to the creature they commanded. It was more than control, it was a bond. Like a soldier and a war dog, but deeper. They moved as one. Fought as one. Killed as one. We'd seen war before, but this was new. This was personal. At first we tried fighting back the old way. Mechs, drones, orbital strikes, but the beasts adapted. The Kravex adapted. And every time we thought we had an edge, they shifted tactics. We were playing chess with someone who was already 5 moves ahead. Then came the turning point when one of the colonies captured a beast. It cost dozens of lives and half the settlement was leveled, but they managed to take one alive. Barely. It wasn't just muscle and bone. It was grown, bred, and enhanced. Part biological, part something else. Something synthetic. But that wasn't the real shock. The real shock came when the scientists ran the genome. Underneath all the layers of engineering, the creature wasn't alien at all. It was Terran, Earth-based, modified beyond recognition, but still rooted in our ecosystem. The Kravex hadn't built their war machines from scratch. They'd taken Earth species, maybe long extinct ones, and twisted them into monsters. They'd used our own biology against us, and that's when the tide shifted. Not just in the war, but in us. See, there's one thing the Kravex didn't understand about humans. We may not be the strongest or the fastest or the most evolved species in the galaxy, but we adapt, and when we're pushed, when we're backed into a corner, something inside us snaps. Not into fear, but into purpose. They thought they could scare us into surrender, but what they really did was remind us of something we'd buried for generations. Something darker, more primal. The creatures we'd left behind in Earth's past, the ones we'd locked away in labs, in history books, in myths. Those weren't mistakes. They were experiments, warnings, and sometimes weapons. We started digging, deep, into old records, hidden black site data, abandoned bio-research bunkers from before the collapse. And what we found was worse than anything the Kravex had unleashed. We'd made our own beasts, long ago, before we knew better. Beasts not born from survival, but from control, power, domination. Some were bred to serve, others to destroy. And most were buried and forgotten for good reason. But now we were out of options and we had to make a choice. Unleash what we'd once locked away, or watch every colony fall one by one. It wasn't an easy decision, and it came with a cost. Not just in lives, but in conscience. Because the moment we released the first one, Project Fenrir, they stopped being monsters from the past, and became part of our present, our future, and maybe our end. You see, the Kravex underestimated us. They thought they were the only ones with war beasts. But what they didn't know was that we'd domesticated worse, and we were about to remind them. But not everything went according to plan, because once you let the monsters out, there's no guarantee they'll fight for you or stop when the war is over. And that's where everything started to spiral. The first time they let Fenrir out, it didn't look like much. Just a black silhouette moving behind a wall of reinforced glass, its shape blurred by thick steam and flickering emergency lights. People in the lab were frozen, not with fear exactly, but with the weight of knowing there was no going back. Fenrir was never supposed to see the surface again. Not after what happened at the original site, not after what it did. But now it stood awake, waiting, like it remembered why it had been made in the first place. Fenrir wasn't like the Kravex beasts. It didn't need a handler. It didn't wait for a signal or commands. It watched. It listened. It understood. That's what made it different. That's what made it dangerous. It was the result of a forgotten bioengineering initiative from Earth's last global war, designed to operate beyond human control if necessary. A failsafe. It had no off switch. They say the old scientists built Fenrir by combining the DNA of several apex predators with advanced neural learning tech. They created something that could adapt not just physically but mentally, learning from every encounter, every mistake, every victory. It wasn't just alive. It was evolving. And after being buried in stasis for decades, the moment it was released, it picked up exactly where it left off. The first test was simple. Track and eliminate a Kravex scout team that had landed near Outpost Delta. 3 beasts, 2 handlers, full combat loadout. It took Fenrir 11 minutes, not just to kill them, but to learn them. The footage from the field drones showed the creature observing from a distance before moving in. Not rushing, not roaring, just waiting. Studying. And when it struck, it was surgical. Almost too fast to process, no wasted movement, no show of power, just clean, terrifying efficiency. Command was impressed, but not everyone agreed this was the right path. Among them was Captain Lara Maddox, former Special Forces, now leading defense at the colony's southern rim. She'd fought in a dozen off-world conflicts and seen what desperation could turn people into. She wasn't against fighting back, but she'd read the original Fenrir reports. And she knew the thing had gone rogue before. During its last deployment, it didn't just wipe out enemy combatants, it turned on allied units. Some said it was a glitch in its programming. Others believed it just decided they were a threat too. But Maddox didn't get a vote. The council was desperate, and desperation makes people gamble. So they greenlit more. Fenrir was just the first. Dig sites were reopened. Forgotten labs powered up again. And one by one, other projects were found. Some still frozen, others not so lucky. One, codenamed Obsidian, had already broken out before the team got there. What they found in its containment area was just carnage. Twisted, metal, ruptured walls, and no sign of the creature itself. But nearby settlements started reporting strange attacks. Not like the Kravex raids. Something more targeted, almost curious. Like it was looking for something, or someone. No one wanted to admit it, but the truth was obvious. These weren't tools we were digging up. They were ghosts from humanity's own past. each one a mirror of the worst we could be. And now they were loose. But we couldn't stop, because the Kraveks weren't slowing down. They'd started building permanent structures near the outer planets, digging deep into the crust, creating breeding pits for their war beasts. They weren't just attacking, they were colonizing, replacing our presence with their own. It was a silent invasion. And by the time most governments caught on, we'd already lost 3 major outposts. So the war changed. It wasn't humans versus Kraveks anymore. It was monsters versus monsters, beasts made by them against the nightmares we made ourselves. And in the middle of it all, people like Maddox trying to hold the line, trying to keep some part of this fight human. She'd formed a small unit, unofficial, made up of soldiers, scientists and engineers who shared the same fear, that in trying to survive we might lose the very thing that made us worth saving. They called themselves the Gray Line, because they weren't black ops and they weren't white hats. They lived in the space in between, watching, documenting, preparing. Maddox had seen what Fenrir could do up close, too close, on a recon mission, near a fallen Kravek supply point. Her squad was ambushed. She called for extraction, knowing it wouldn't get there in time, but Fenrir came instead. No one had sent it. No one even knew where it was. It just appeared. And it didn't fight like a beast. It fought like a protector, like it was choosing her. After that, Maddox didn't sleep for 3 days. She couldn't stop thinking about it. The way Fenrir had looked at her, not like prey, not like an enemy, but like an ally, or maybe something else, like it was trying to remember her. That was the scariest part, because she'd never met it before, at least not that she knew of. Then came the rumors, whispers that Fenrir wasn't the only one that had developed memory, that some of the other reawakened projects were acting strange, avoiding command centers, targeting very specific Kravek sites, as if they had a purpose no one had programmed into them, as if they were following instincts or old orders, or maybe something even deeper, a shared connection. The scientists were split. Some believed the war beasts were forming their own network, a hive of sorts linked by their enhanced cognition. Others thought it was worse, that the original creators had built in a hidden protocol, a backdoor command system long forgotten. And now something or someone was trying to reactivate it. And then something new arrived. A Kravex vessel, larger than any we'd seen before, dropped into orbit over Colony 13. But it didn't release war beasts. It sent a signal. A direct message. Translated roughly, it said, "You unleashed them. You don't know what they are. We warned you. And now they're coming for both of us." That's when it hit us. The Kraveks weren't just using our biology to create war beasts. They'd found them. Our original ones. The ones we abandoned. The ones we lost control of. The ones we thought were dead. And they were waking up. Not just Fenrir. Not just Obsidian. All of them. We thought we were using them to win a war, but we might have just restarted one that had ended a long time ago, for a reason. And now, something older than both our species is rising, and it doesn't care who unleashed it. Maddox stood on the edge of the canyon overlook, visor dimmed against the rising light from the colony fires below. The evacuation had failed. Half the civilians got out. The rest were still trapped behind Kravek's lines. Her squad was already 2 men down, and comms were jammed for the last hour. The beasts had started moving differently now. Not just attacking infrastructure, but targeting command centers, biolabs, storage vaults. It was like they were looking for something, but she didn't know what. And worse, neither did anyone else. The message from the Kravek ship was still looping in fragments over shortwave. "They are not yours anymore." That was all they got before the signal cut. No follow-up, no explanation, no threat. Just that. One cryptic line. It stayed with her like a splinter in the brain, itching at every decision she made. We thought we were bringing weapons back to life. Turns out we might have been waking something with its own purpose, and now it was loose across multiple colonies, spreading faster than command could contain. Elsewhere, deep inside Colony 9's Subterranean Research Division. Dr. Ren Calder stared at a dark screen, pale fingers tapping nervously at the terminal. He was the only one left after the breach. He hadn't left the lab in 3 days, surviving on ration packs and caffeine tabs, surrounded by broken consoles and strange animal tracks across the tile. His research into Project Worm had been top secret, buried even within internal logs. It was the last of the recovered bio units, the biggest, the most dangerous. They hadn't released it. They hadn't needed to, because it broke out on its own. Calder had seen it happen. The containment chamber hadn't been breached by any outside force. It had opened from the inside. The locks disengaged like it had a key, like it remembered how the system worked. He couldn't explain it, but the log showed something terrifying. A signal broadcast on a private frequency, untraceable, with no listed source. Something had called to Worm, and it answered. What troubled Calder most wasn't the destruction Worm left behind. It was what it didn't destroy. The beast moved through the facility, bypassing security drones and automated defenses, tearing through the walls toward one room in particular, a forgotten archive. Inside it, pre-collapse memory banks from Earth's old defense grid. It shouldn't have meant anything, but Worm took the core, not data, just the core, and vanished. No, one knew where it had gone. Meanwhile, above ground, Maddox's unit received a strange tip from a refugee convoy near the equator belt. One of the kids had seen something she described as a shadow wolf fighting the Kravex. The story was easy to dismiss until she mentioned it by name. Not a name given by scientists or soldiers, but by the creature itself. She said it told her quietly like a whisper in her mind. Fenrir. Maddox felt the air catch in her lungs. The girl wasn't lying. She couldn't be. That kind of detail wasn't public. But the implications chilled her more than anything the Kravex had done. These creatures weren't just acting on instinct. They were communicating, choosing, interacting. Some were avoiding humans. Some were attacking us. And some were protecting us. That's what made it impossible to trust any of them. Because the moment we started treating them like allies, we forgot they weren't designed to be loyal. They were designed to survive. A new problem was rising at the edge of Sector 4, where strange energy readings had begun appearing across the mountain ranges. Scout teams sent to investigate didn't come back, not even the drones. All anyone got was static and one glitched visual, something massive slithering across the ridge, scales shimmering like mirror glass, eyes like molten gold. It didn't match any recovered creature profiles, and it didn't match any known Kravex class either. Something new had entered the field, or something very old. Maddox's second-in-command, Reyes, had a theory. He believed the original creators of the war beasts, our own people from Earth's past, might have built a hidden system like a failsafe, buried in code or DNA, designed to pull them back together if they were ever scattered. Like a beacon. And now, with so many of them active again, something had triggered the signal. A call. A summoning. Maybe to regroup. Maybe to evolve. Or maybe to finish something we never let them complete. At the same time, a separate threat emerged. The Kravex started retreating from certain regions, not all, just some. Strategic ones. Bio-rich zones with ancient forests and deep mineral deposits. At first, people thought they were weakening, but intel from hacked Kravex scouts told a different story. The Kravex weren't giving up those areas. They were abandoning them, sacrificing them, as if they knew something was coming, something they didn't want to be near. One report even mentioned the term, the Hollowed. A name said in Kravex battle language, translated by their neural interfaces. It didn't mean anything to us until Calder cross-referenced it with old Earth mythologies stored in the Legacy archives. The Hollowed had been a code name, not for a creature, for a group of them. A failed project so destructive that it was erased from the history logs, not destroyed, hidden. And now signs pointed to their reawakening. There were no visuals, no confirmed sightings, Only one last audio feed from a rescue drone sent into a collapsed zone. A man's voice, barely audible over static, repeating, "They're not animals. They're remembering us." And then silence. The worst part wasn't what we didn't know. It was what we were starting to suspect. That maybe the Kraveks had been fighting them too, long before they ever reached us. That maybe this wasn't a war between two species anymore, but a war against something both sides had tried and failed to contain, and now it was free, and it was looking for something or someone. It started to rain sulfur ash over Colony 13, drifting from the cracks in the upper atmosphere like some kind of warning. The sky had turned a deep, bruised red, and the light no longer felt natural. Maddox stood in the control room of the forward command post, eyes locked on the central holomap. Blips kept vanishing. Outposts that once lit up the map now blinked out one by one, not from direct attacks but from something deeper. A kind of silence that swept in fast and left nothing behind. Command was scrambling. No one was responding. On the Kraveks front, the invaders who had once pushed us to the edge were now falling back into their own vessels, withdrawing from the surface. Maddox watched a live feed of their ships lifting off from Colony 10's basin, abandoning the very ground they'd fought to claim for months. They didn't even take their wounded. They just left them. It didn't make sense. Until the ground started shaking. At first it felt like a tremor, but then came the sound. Low. Deep. Like something massive moving under the surface. Every sensor array picked it up, even the old ones buried in ancient soil. Readings were off the scale, unstable, almost alive. Maddox glanced at Reyes, who was pale, silent, and clutching a piece of equipment so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Something had been sleeping underneath us. All this time. The Hollowed weren't a myth. They weren't just a forgotten experiment. They were real, and they were moving. All over the colonies, reports started pouring in. Strange lights in the forests. Wildlife fleeing en masse. Beasts, both ours and Kraveks, going berserk. And then the air went still. No wind, no comms static, no ship noise. Just quiet. In the middle of that stillness, a message broadcast across all channels, every language, every dialect, clearly artificial, but in a voice that felt disturbingly human. You built us to end your wars. We ended you. You buried us in silence. And now we remember. Then the storm hit. Massive electromagnetic pulses swept across the major colony grids, frying tech, grounding ships, shutting down weapon systems. Lights flickered and went out. Maddox's base was plunged into red emergency glow. Screens blinked static. And then, one by one, strange symbols started etching themselves across the main terminal. Not from outside hacking, from something inside. The system. Something old. Dr. Calder, still hiding in his isolated lab, stared at the same symbols. He'd seen them once before, in the design logs from Earth's lost defense grid, buried under layers of classified encryption. He ran a decoding algorithm, praying it wouldn't work. But it did. The message behind the symbols was short. Core directive. Consume. Replace. Evolve. It was never about defense. It was evolution through eradication. The original purpose wasn't just to protect humanity from invaders. It was to replace anything that threatened our future, including us. These war beasts had no loyalty, no borders, no sides. Just one mission, buried in code and blood, survival through dominance. Meanwhile, deep in the southern gorge, Fenrir reappeared. Maddox saw it from the scout tower. It wasn't running. It wasn't attacking. It was standing still, watching the Kau ridge, where thick smoke and glowing veins of energy were spilling from beneath the cracked earth. Its fur bristled with static charge, and something in its eyes had changed. No longer animal, no longer even machine. It looked ancient. She left the tower and crossed the ridge on foot. Reyes shouted after her, but she didn't turn back. Something in her gut told her she had to go. Fenrir didn't move when she approached, just watched. And when she got close enough, it did something no one expected. It bowed its head, like it remembered her. Or maybe someone she reminded it of. She reached out, slowly. Her hand trembled as she touched the edge of its muzzle. A flash of something pulsed in her head. Images, colors, voices, not her own, but shared. Fenrir's memories. Long ago. Laboratories, warfields, a child's voice, commands, betrayal, and pain. So much pain. Then a new image. A cavern. Deep, massive, filled with something pulsing, alive, with tendrils of thought reaching out. A hive. Not just physical, neural, mental. And at its core, a creature unlike anything they'd seen. The first. The origin of the Hollowed. Maddox gasped and fell back, Fenrir stepping forward like it understood, like it was trying to warn her. They weren't waking up on their own. Something was calling them. Something worse. Back at command, the last functioning long-range scanners picked up a structure rising from beneath the planet's crust, hundreds of kilometers across. It wasn't built. It was grown, organic, layered with tech and bone, reaching for the sky like a throne carved from extinction itself. Every war beast, ours, Kravex, Hollowed, was headed toward it, some out of loyalty, some out of fear, some because they had no choice. And in the middle of it a signal was rising, low frequency, non-verbal, a heartbeat, not human, not machine, something older, something alive, something ready to begin. The heartbeat grew louder as Maddox and Fenrir stood at the edge of the cliff, overlooking the valley where the massive organic structure had risen. It wasn't just a building. It was something else entirely. Part machine, part living organism, like a monument grown from every war and every mistake humanity had buried over the centuries. Tendrils of light pulsed through its surface, as if carrying thoughts between its walls. The war beasts had gathered below it, a sea of claws, scales, and engineered muscle, but they weren't attacking. They were waiting. From the comms channel, miraculously still open despite the electromagnetic chaos, Dr. Calder's voice cracked through. He sounded different now. Tired, but calm. He said the structure wasn't a weapon, it was a core. A central node. The original command center built into the DNA of every war beast humanity had ever created. It had activated itself. Not from a human signal, not from Kravex interference, but because the beasts themselves triggered it, they had chosen to reconnect. Calder believed this was the final phase of the evolution program, a last desperate act from Earth's old warlords who had long been erased by history. These creatures weren't meant to stay under control forever. They were designed to survive the extinction of their creators, to learn, to adapt, and eventually, to decide for themselves. That was what frightened everyone. But then something happened that no one predicted. The war beasts didn't attack. Not the humans, not the Kravex, not even each other. Instead, they stood in a formation around the structure, facing outward, like sentries. Fenrir turned his head toward Maddox, eyes glowing with soft, pulsing light. She felt it again, those shared memories stronger this time. Emotions, clarity, choice. Fenrir had chosen her, and so had others. Across multiple colonies, reports came in. War beasts standing guard near human shelters, creatures once thought to be lost or violent, now protecting evacuation zones and guiding survivors through wrecked terrain. Not all beasts responded this way, but enough did to create a pattern. Calder's theory held true. The creatures were remembering their time with humans. Some of those memories were built on fear, but some were built on connection. The Kravex. Ships hovered in the upper atmosphere, unsure of what to do. Their invasion had failed, not because of human resistance, but because something far older and far stronger had risen from beneath the surface. Their generals made contact with human command for the first time, not to negotiate, but to warn. They called the structure the End Seed, a final evolutionary node from a failed civilization. They had encountered one once before, centuries ago. It had consumed entire planets before self-terminating. That's why they feared Earth's legacy. That's why they launched preemptive attacks. They were trying to stop it from waking, but it was too late now. Back at base, Maddox watched the skies as the pulsing light in the valley dimmed. The structure had gone quiet. Still alive, but no longer broadcasting. Calder's scans showed its energy signature flattening, like a machine powering down after completing its final task. Whatever message it had to share, it was finished. The war beasts slowly began to leave, scattering across the planet in different directions. Some returned to the forests, some simply vanished, and a few, like Fenrir, stayed near humans, watching, waiting. Weeks passed. Colonies began rebuilding, but everything had changed. The war with the Kravex was over, not through surrender or diplomacy, but through understanding a greater threat. In the ruins of that conflict, an uneasy truce formed. Humans and Kravex began cooperating, studying the creatures together. Calder was put in charge of a new research division, the Interspecies Alliance Project. His first report was simple, but powerful. He wrote, "They were never monsters. They were mirrors, and now they are more." Maddox chose to leave the military. She settled near the southern gorge, close to where Fenrir still roamed. She saw him often. Never too close, never far. Their bond didn't need words, just presence. She started helping rebuild local communities, telling her story where it mattered. Not through fear, but through truth. She told them how the creatures we thought we unleashed were not wild but wise, that humanity had built them in our image, yet they had grown into something beyond us. Something capable of destruction, yes, but also of choice. And in the end, that's what saved us. The beasts we made for war taught us how to survive peace. The Kravex left soon after, without ceremony. They took nothing with them, not even the wreckage of their fallen. Maddox suspected they had learned something too, something about what it meant to face a threat you couldn't control and live to speak of it. Maybe they understood now that brute force wasn't the only answer. Or maybe they saw a part of themselves in the hollowed. Creatures built for survival, for war, until war was no longer the goal. In the final message from Calder, broadcast across all colonies, he asked a single question. What does humanity become when its weapons outgrow the war? No one had an answer, but the silence that followed felt different. Not like fear, more like hope. And somewhere in the distant forest, under a night sky cleared of smoke and fire, Fenrir lifted his head and howled. Not a sound of warning, but of memory, of beginnings, of something ancient. Finally, at peace.